Hey everyone, I'm Michael Paulson. I cover theater for the New York Times, and I'm joining you live from New York City. Welcome to episode 5 of Offstage, our digital series on theater during this pandemic. We began last spring by taking a look back at the Broadway season that had just been forced to close. A year later, we're exploring how some of the biggest shows have now safely reopened, but on the other side of the globe. We're going to check in with actors, producers, and fans to see what we can learn about how the reopening has unfolded in Australia and what lessons there are for the rest of the world. Many of the shows we're going to talk about are musicals, so of course we'll have songs. In a few minutes, you'll hear a little number called Let It Go, sung by the Australian Elsa in Frozen. And later we'll hear Me in the Sky from the Australian production of Come From Away. Plus we'll be checking in with Hamilton, Moulin Rouge, and Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. To kick things off, let's turn to my colleague, Damien Cave in Sydney.
Hi, I'm Damien Cave, the Australia Bureau Chief for the New York Times. Australia is one of 150 countries where the New York Times has correspondents on the ground. I'm joining you here from Sydney, and I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. For those who don't know, an acknowledgement of country is a way that Australians pay their respects to the traditional owners of the lands and seas. It's a simple nod to the ancient history of this continent that opens every cultural event, big or small. So today, I come to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from across this nation and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. I'm also standing in front of the Capitol Theatre in Sydney, where Frozen the musical is about to begin. I was here a few weeks ago talking to people backstage, and it was amazing to see how COVID has changed the production, making it much more complicated for everyone. But I also was here a few weeks ago with my daughter to see the show, and it was amazing to be in a room with all these people with the same characters and songs that we've loved for so long. Let's take a look and see and hear how people are thinking about coming back to theater here in Sydney.
We always go to the theatre, and we did miss out on going to the theatre last year, and she's been really excited to come see Frozen because it's her favourite movie.
What's your favorite Frozen song?
Let It Go.
Why did you choose to do this instead of something else today?
Obsessed with Frozen.
I think it's the feeling, being here with people, the sense of being excited for something, like it's a community.
I'm super excited. We're pumped to see Elsa and Anna, hey?
Well, we're bringing my granddaughter here for her 6th birthday party, so we're wearing the crowns for Elsa.
How do you feel coming to see the theatre?
We're
super excited. It's the first time we've done anything in a while, so it's super exciting. And we're very happy to be back and to be able to do things normally.
So you're feeling safe? Does it feel like a courageous act? Or?
No, I think it feels totally normal. I think we've been super lucky.
We saw Frozen originally on Broadway 2 years ago. My daughter saw it. She was 6 years old. And when the curtain came down, she said, "Mummy, I wish that could be me one day." And now she's in the show.
She plays young Anna. It's actually my wife's 44th time.
44th time I've been to every one of her shows. I am a theatre nut.
Why is it important for theatre to come back?
A lot of people lost a lot of jobs during this time, and theatre makes the world a happier place, I think, We are so lucky to be in a country where, we're alive and open, whereas a lot of the world is not.
We're at the Lyric Theatre in Sydney, where Hamilton recently opened.
We're here to see Hamilton, of course, and very excited to do so. We've wanted to see it for a very long time, and we're supposed to be going to the US last year. Then unfortunately, obviously, due to circumstances, we weren't able to go. So feeling very excited to be here tonight, and the precautions they've got in place, I think, are making us feel good and safe to be out.
The theatre is one of the oldest forms of communication and worship, really, within our society. So it's just fantastic that we're able to, after a difficult year, the resiliency of the oldest forms of communication continuing is really brilliant.
We flew up from Melbourne purely to come see Hamilton, which luckily we booked, I think 2 years ago, to be able to come.
We've been waiting a long time to see it.
And also to be able to get on a plane again.
The atmosphere is people are excited to be out again. Super excited for this show. We bought our tickets almost a year ago. The day has finally come.
And what about the precautions? I mean, is it feel weird to have a mask on all the time?
It does, a little bit, yes. It does feel a bit strange to have a mask, but I guess it's a small inconvenience for people.
You'll see me again later talking to the actors who are back on stage. But first, let's check out an exclusive performance. Here's the Australian company of Frozen.
The snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen. A kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the queen. The wind is howling like this swirling storm inside. I couldn't keep it in, heaven knows I tried. Don't let them in, don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. Well, now they know. Let it go, let it go. Can't hold it back anymore. Let it go, let it go. Turn away and slam the door. Some distance makes everything seem small, and the fears that once controlled me can't get to me at all. It's time to see what I can do to test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. Let it go.
Wasn't that great? It's so cool to watch Gemma transform into Elsa and to hear her take on that song. Yes. So now I'm joined by 4 theater producers who've been working for months to open, or in some cases reopen, their shows in Australia. Sue Frost is the lead producer of Come From Away. Jeffrey Seller is the lead producer of Hamilton. Carmen Pavlovich is the lead producer of Moulin Rouge, the musical. And Tom Schumacher, as the president of Disney Theatrical Productions, is the producer of Frozen. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for being here. Let's begin with the obvious question. And Tom, I'm going to start with you since Frozen was the first of these shows to open. Why Australia? What is it about that country that has allowed theater to return there before it has come back in the US or in Europe?
Well, the first thing I have to think about is that many of us have done lots of shows in Australia because it's a fantastic theater market. So, we've had great success there. The shows play there. The audience there is fantastic. And there's a long history of that. And for many of us, we stand on the shoulders of Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron McIntosh, who really opened this territory up for foreign productions to come in. And as we were looking at where we were going to do it, we, of course, had booked to be with Frozen in Australia before the pandemic hit. So we had sold tickets already. We were just planning to be there. And then once we were in the middle of the pandemic, we had to navigate that. And Australia was the first of the territories that was able to open up. So the logistics of Australia were great, but we were already going to be in Australia without regard to it being the first country to open in the pandemic.
Just got back from Australia where you oversaw the opening of Hamilton. What was that experience like?
Oh my gosh, it was the best experience I've had in the last 14 months. I like to say, I've been on the other side. I've seen the future, and I know how we are going to come back and be together and enjoy what it feels like to be in a theater watching an extraordinary group of performers lift us up and tell us a little bit about the meaning of life. There's no COVID in Australia. When you look at the Sydney Morning Herald every day, it says 0 local cases. And that is what has been so special. And that's what made my experience so special, to be able to be a free man in Sydney with an extraordinary group of young performers who are making a magical, warm, embracing, and passionate production of Hamilton. And of course, it's the only Hamilton anybody can see right now all over the world.
Sue, Come From Away was actually running in Australia before the pandemic, and it shut down and it's now reopened.
That's right, yes.
So what have you learned about both audience demand and price sensitivity as we emerge from this pandemic?
Well, I think the audience was ready and willing and delighted to be back. And there was no price sensitivity. I think there was huge pent-up demand. Melbourne, where we reopened, had been under a very, very strict lockdown. And I don't think anybody believed we'd be back as quickly as we were. But as soon as it was clear that we were open and back in business, we had terrific response. The first couple of weeks, actually, most of the people there were people who had been to see us, earlier in the March and came back with other people to share it. So it was kind of fun, kind of exciting.
Nice. Carmen, you're an Australian producer who opened Moulin Rouge first in New York, and now you're getting ready to do the same in your home country. How is the process that you're going through for casting and rehearsing and everything else affected by the pandemic?
Thanks, Michael. Well, it's been a pretty wild ride. So we had planned, like, Tom just mentioned, Frozen had planned. We had our dates set for a July opening of this year. Although Moulin Rouge Australia was supposed to be the 4th production that we'd rolled out in this time, we were going to the West End and opening the North American tour on our original plans. So unusually, Australia is now the first time we've replicated the show. And that's brought a lot of challenges in and of itself, because Australia typically is a market that receives shows once they've been replicated a number of times. So just in terms of getting creative team here, having a bench of creative associates, we're just not as far along in the process as we ordinarily would be for taking on a show of this scale in Australia. The other unusual factor for us was that we hadn't really commenced our auditions. In fact, we were just in the very first few days of, the very early part of auditions when we had the shutdown at the same time as the US was shut down. And so we sent our US team home out of an abundance of caution at that time. So we had to, for us, it was the #1 milestone in terms of actually being able to confirm the opening, because as everybody here knows, you can't start fitting and building costumes till you have a cast. And we couldn't, Melbourne, as Sue said, was under very strict lockdown really up until the very end of last year. And so we had to make a decision about going in January and February, which is unprecedented. I've never cast a show in one round before, ever. And we took a gamble on being able to do that. And it was pretty wild. It was like, well, first of all, we had the border closure with Victoria because there was a tiny outbreak and it shuts the borders very quickly here. So we had to quickly move 500 people from our first day of auditions in, was going to be Melbourne, and flip it to Sydney. So those sort of logistics plagued us the whole time. And then we had a live streaming process to the creative team in the US that was somewhat like producing a TV show in a studio for 6 days and nights. But amazingly, we got the show cast and not ever scraping the barrel in any way. So it's definitely been transforming for all of us in terms of how we might utilize aspects of this technology going forward.
Great. We got a ton of questions from Times subscribers, and I'm going to try to work some of those in here. Many people want to know what steps you're all taking to keep actors and audiences and crew safe. Jeffrey, I see you smiling, so maybe you can start.
Our actors have been tested every single week since the day that they started work with us in auditions. Our audience is exclusively wearing masks every time they walk into the theater. And then we have what we call Zone A and Zone B. Zone A being the audience place where they congregate, and Zone B being backstage. And the rule of thumb is we never mix people between Zone A and Zone B. And those of us like producers that may cross over have to go through a special process of putting on protective equipment if and when we cross through. But by bifurcating those two groups, keeping the actors tested every week and keeping the audience in masks, we have found a safe way. But for the reader, what they need to know is that, as I said, with almost no cases on the ground in Sydney, there is a sense of security that does not exist yet in our country.
Yeah. And, you know, Michael, when you think about this, recognize that we were observing protocols inside our theaters that you're not observing anyplace else. When people imagine, is it safe? We were ultra safe in the theaters because we'd all leave together and just go sit in a restaurant and have dinner together, and then experience protocols when we came back in the stage door.
And an important factor of the safety, we call it COVID normal in Australia. Every time there's a safety plan that's put in place, it's about how do we live a normal life, allowing for the fact that COVID is still in the world. And contact tracing has just been so integral to that in Australia. So every time we go into a restaurant or a shop, and indeed the theatre, you hold up your iPhone with a QR code, and that helps very quick tracing and locking down of cases. And you'll see here often little areas going into a snap lockdown, and it's been really fundamental to getting the disease under control here.
That's an excellent segue to this next question. A number of readers, including Helen from Sydney and Susie from New York and Howard from Maine, asked if you all have observed differences in culture or attitudes or comfort levels in Australia compared to the US.
Oh, yes. I don't know. I think people in Australia do what they're told, don't they? I mean, it's been kind of extraordinary. And I think that's why there's zero COVID. I mean, when Melbourne went into lockdown, they went into lockdown. And people did what they were told. And they went out once a day for an hour for food. And that was it, you know? And I think that's why we're back in Australia. And that's why we're not yet back here.
You know, and it was, oh, go ahead, Carmen. Go ahead. You go.
You know, Australia, people talk about a national ethos here of egalitarianism and mateship. And there's definitely imbued in all our social structures this idea of what's good for one is good for all. And the whole country's founded on this idea. And there's been always a recognition of a role for government in terms of bringing social ideals to the fore. So there's, you know, generally speaking, relatively speaking, trust in government here. And the government took a bipartisan approach to management and communication with the public. And I think it's no underestimating what a contribution that made in terms of getting it under control here, which, sadly was lacking in the US in the critical stages of it. So that's another difference as well.
And the rules of quarantine were extraordinary, Michael. I mean, you were guided from the moment you got off the airplane. You were and there was an escort on your bus as you came into your hotel. It was so extraordinary. And all of us who quarantined, you had no human contact for 2 weeks. None of this, well, you can go grocery shopping, you can swing by the drugstore, no human contact except the people who came to PCR test you. And you can argue, you can say, oh, it was so brutal, oh, it was so hard. It was fantastic because when you got out, you knew everyone was safe. And a thing that connects to Carmen is I think it actually served a brilliant purpose for those of us working in the theater because it level set. There's all sorts of hierarchy in the theater. But when you came into that theater, I know it happened for Jeffrey, when you walked in the theater after having done your 2 weeks, everyone knew you did your 2 weeks time. You made a sacrifice to be part of that team. And I thought it made the process really great.
I want to ask you a little about tourism. Sydney was a big tourist destination before the pandemic. Now it's much harder to visit Australia, and even domestic travel has at times been restricted. I wonder how the absence of tourists has affected your shows, and how does that affect your expectations for New York and London?
Australia's not typically a market that relies on international tourism, unlike the West End and Broadway. So it's a lot of interstate tourism, and we see so many border closures here really does, wreak havoc with that. And I think, what we're all confronting is this kind of approach to ticketing policies that, address people's concerns about travel and border closures in that regard. But certainly from Moulin Rouge's point of view, I'm not really feeling concerned about the lack of international tourism that'll be here to support the shows.
Yeah, I think it's very different. I think that, again, as you said, Carmen, people are used to going state to state to state. So early on in our run in Melbourne is when they had that minor shutdown in Sydney, and those borders were locked down, completely locked down. And as soon as they opened up again, people were going back and forth. It's just the nature of the beast over there, isn't it? Yeah, I think we will have in New York. Certainly, we will feel the want of international tourism for a while, and I think we're preparing for that. Would you say that's the case?
Yes. I mean, we have a lot of data from NYC and Co., our tourist board, but it tells a lot about tourism and what domestic tourism, business travel, international tourism, and we're learning a lot about that. But I don't see a correlative really with Australia. I mean, Carmen knows best because she's our Australian on the call.
Well, I mean, the other positive outcome for us is, Australians travel a lot. We get our little 2-week term breaks and off we go to the other side of the world. And so a benefit that we're experiencing now in terms of ticket sales is there's pent-up demand. There's a lot of people who have been out of work and, of course, are hurting very deeply, particularly in our business. There's a lot of people who haven't been, and they've got all this cash reserve that they haven't been spending on the sort of things they normally would. So this idea of a staycation, it's really, I think, being reflected very heavily in the ticket sales we're seeing. And again, thinking about New York, well, that's going to be interesting, isn't it? There are some shows that rely more on tourism than others, and so it is going to be a very different dynamic in the market there, presumably. But for Australia, we're genuinely an island, and so we genuinely have a captive audience here.
Michael, related to that, though, is this idea, and I think, Jeffrey, you felt it too. We would sit in these hotel towers and see all these empty office buildings, floor after floor after floor of empty office buildings, and yet people are coming to the show, right? So people who are not working in the central business district are the people who are coming. And our theater has just been full like a normal theater. It's been fantastic.
So Australia's always, I think Carmen alluded to this earlier, has always been a destination for big shows from Broadway and the West End, but often fairly late in the life cycle. Do you think this experience will change Australia's place in the kind of global theatrical ecosystem?
Potentially, Australia needs more big theaters, right? A lot of it is real estate, but and you sometimes you have to wait a long time to get the right theater.
Look, I'm hoping. I'm worried I'm going to talk too much here, but I'll try not to. I'm hopeful. You know, we have the world's eyes on us at the moment, and to me, this feels like 2000 when the Olympics happened. And you know, we've sort of grown up feeling like the little sister all the time of the West End, the little sister of Broadway, and you know, film. There's a massive amount of film happening here because you know, Baz has just shot the Elvis film. Nicole Kidman's been out here doing Nine Perfect Strangers. There's just a lot of Hollywood coming to Australia as well. So I have to assume that from both a theatrical and a just general entertainment point of view, that it is drawing a lot of attention to the country, to locations, to the workforce that's here, to the support of government that exists in this country. And so my personal hope is that this does represent some sort of new golden age for Australia. Because I think people have really had a great time here, and economically, it's really a terrific market. So it's a great moment for the country, and I really do hope it's something we take in terms of lessons and awareness and turn that into a new layer of cultural development for ourselves.
Great. Alexandra from British Columbia wants to know what, if anything, has changed about your business model as a result of this experience. Anybody?
We were talking actually before this started. I think one of the things that we've learned is that we don't have to travel as many people. So there were 16 of us who came down for this. And in truth, we normally would have had upwards of 40 because people would have come in for a quick, you know, 1 week pop in to check. Designers and things might have come at the very end. And even, as Carmen says, it was early in the life cycle of our shows. But we've learned there's things you can do on video. I was there live with Michael Grandage and my co-producer Ann Court. We were all there live to cast it, which we didn't have to do it on video because we were planning before. But many things, costume fittings, lots of stuff were able to happen remote. And this remote stuff didn't hurt the process at all. So I think we're going to probably investigate more of that for certain functions.
Yeah, for you, thoughts on that?
I think Tom gets it exactly right. My director, who did cast the show through Zoom, you know, in our instance, all four of our creators, Thomas Kail, Alex Lacamoire, Andy Blankenbuehler, and Lin-Manuel, they all cast the show by Zoom, and they all attended rehearsal by Zoom. And though I do not say that that is going to become a custom that we try to do more, I will say that Tommy jokingly said to me, "I'm never getting on a plane again."
I think we're all feeling that way.
For a man with a 1-year-old child at home, I understood what he was talking about.
Sure.
Yeah, my daughter said to me recently that she feels like she's having the childhood she never got because her mother's not leaving all the time. But, you know, we had to do our theatre surveys by Zoom as well. And it was so interesting because, of course, we never think to do it. And the commitment to come to Australia, not just financial, but time-wise, you know, we're all trying to be more responsible in terms of our footprint across the globe.
Yes.
So I mean, that's been another factor as well that I think there's many opportunities in what we've learned to actually introduce more responsible practice into our workplaces going forward. So I think that's definitely been a real gain.
Great. So as we wrap up the panel, the number one question our readers are asking is, when will Broadway reopen? The mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, said this morning that we should expect Broadway full strength in September. Does that sound right to you all, or what are you thinking?
I'm going to let the mayor and the governor work that out, and we're going to follow their really good advice. How's that?
It's an answer. Anybody else?
I felt very conservative on the question of coming back, and I just got so sick of talking about it last year. We just kind of decided to put our energy into things we could control. But I certainly would say, for the first time ever, I feel like it's within reach. It feels like there's this horizon that we can see a light, and the sort of timeframes people are talking about, late in the year, feel to me for the first time like they're reasonable and achievable. And we're still all the devil's in the detail in terms of safety and how we bring audiences back, and importantly, how we bring workplace back. And we know there's a lot of things being asked of us beyond just COVID safety in terms of this new workplace. So there's a lot to do, but it feels like that that window of later this year feels to me like that's a time frame we could reasonably be looking at.
We're dependent on the vaccine. We're dependent on all of our citizens taking this vaccine because it is the vaccine that's going to set us free. So now we've got to get from 40 and 50% of the adult population to 70 and 75%. And when everybody gets vaccinated, we're coming back.
Sue, you feeling optimistic?
Absolutely. For the first time, as Carmen says, we've been talking about this and talking about this and talking about this, and then our hopes are dashed, our hopes are dashed, our hopes are dashed. And now it really does feel like we're making forward movement. And of course, we all want our companies back working safely, and we want audiences back safely, and anything we can do. Yes, Jeffrey, please, vaccinations, to have a taste of what normal is with our Australian companies just makes it that much more urgent for us. I mean, you saw those people, they were walking around without masks. They were smiling. They were putting masks on just to go into the theater. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah. And we wouldn't have done that 6 months ago. We've just had a taste of freedom, and no one wants it taken away again. So now we're all incredibly compliant. So, it is what's going to be required in the US because you didn't have that sort of shutdown we had. So now your only way out is vaccination for sure.
Well, Carmen, Sue, Jeffrey, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Now we've got a few more Australian theatre fans who wanted to share their thoughts. Some of them you might even recognize. Let's take a look.
Hi, New York Times readers. It's Basil Luhrmann here in Australia. We are really excited that we're about to open Moulin Rouge, in August. But what it makes me think about is just how precious and how much we've missed being with an audience, communing in a theatre, and watching artists and performers up on stage tell a story or sing a song. So I'm shouting out to all those artists and say, we're so looking forward to buying a ticket, sitting in a theatre and watching you tell a story, do a show, sing a song. See you in the theatre soon.
This is Kate Walsh coming to you from Perth, Western Australia. I just wanted to say good luck, break a leg to everyone on stage and behind the scenes. We're thrilled that you get to go back and do live performance. And for audiences to gather and watch you all as well. I know in the States, everyone's eager to get back to work. So I feel so fortunate to have been able to do a play here last October and know how critical it is to be able to do live performance in theater and share it with the world. So go get them.
Hi, I'm Rose Byrne.
I'm Bobby Cannavale. On March 8th, 2020, Rose and I completed a successful run of Simon Stone's adaptation of Medea at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. 4 days later, the global pandemic shut down the American theater. Here we are a year later.
Artists and theatre workers have tirelessly been working to keep the theatres going remotely through virtual events and outreach, and all of that hard work has proven vital in keeping the theatre alive.
And while the support in virtual spaces has been robust, there is truly nothing like the visceral experience of live theatre.
In Australia, theatres are slowly reopening, a true testament to the people of Australia, both behind and on the stage. Most importantly, of course, is the audience who entrust us to do our part in continuing this great legacy that is theatre. As a theatrical artist and an Australian, it gives me great pleasure to be able to congratulate all of you for your phenomenal job in what felt like an impossible time.
And we look forward to a time, hopefully not long from now, where all theatres will be able to make the necessary and wonderful step to reopening their doors.
I'm back, and I'm joined by 4 actors who are back on the stage performing. Simon Burke, who played one of the leads in Pippin, one of the first Australian shows to open back in November. It was recently announced that he'll be playing the role of Harold Zidler in the Australian premiere of Moulin Rouge that debuts in Melbourne this fall. Charisse Hamilton, who plays Hannah and others in the musical Come From Away. Gareth Reeves, who plays Harry Potter in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Gemma Ricks, who plays Elsa in Frozen the Musical. Well, welcome all of you guys. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually. Really love to be on stage, but you guys are the lucky ones who get to be on stage. What's the biggest difference between doing theater in a COVID world and doing theater without it?
I think that the strangest thing so far is looking out to the audience and everybody's wearing masks, because I didn't realize how much I look out and I actually see people's smiles. And so you're actually missing that sort of connection with the audience. So that's kind of been a little bit of a thing to adapt to, but they're still clapping and cheering, and you can hear that through the mask.
The sort of workplace practices, really. You know, anyone that comes backstage that isn't in the immediate company looks like they're coming to sort of clean up a murder. They're in their like little booties and the whole suits and the whole, you know, the signing in and out.
Not just on stage, but in the audience. It's almost like every person that's in that space, whether it's in the auditorium or on stage, it's kind of like a contract you have. Like the audience, they're up for coming in. They've decided that there is little or no risk at all to being there, and we are there to kind of honor that and give them the best time. And so I found when we opened Pippin, you know, every time those unmistakable first 4 bars of the overture start, you just felt this roar from the crowd. We're here and we're going to experience something together, and it's quite a beautiful thing.
Pippin was one of the really first ones to kind of get back on stage. Was it hard? Did you feel nervous?
Look, there was so many mixed emotions. I mean, there was an enormous gratitude. You know, I think we started in October last year, rehearsals. Coming out of 6 months, as almost everyone in our industry, of course, all over the world, but certainly in Australia, of nothing. So there's an amount of kind of responsibility, gratitude. I have to say a certain amount of guilt in some ways of you know, your fellow performers in Australia, and certainly, you know, performers around the world. I mean, I felt very keenly how incredibly lucky we were, and also the responsibility that was on the shoulders of Pippin and Frozen opening within a week of each other. You know, obviously our job is just to get on stage and do the best possible, but like the fact that the shows were such litmus tests for the rest of the world.
Charisse, when we spoke before, you were talking about the conversations you'd had with some of your friends in the US too, and what's that been like? Like, what are they telling you?
My heart is torn in so many directions, because I'm looking at my friends, and they're all artists who want to get back on the stage. They're absolutely still working and trying to do whatever they can. But this feeling of being on the stage is wonderful. And looking back home and seeing that my friends don't get to do that, it's really hard. There is an amount of guilt, and there is an amount of just frustration. People are depressed. People are frustrated. People are broke. People are scared. And it's really, really bizarre and surreal to be so happy and grateful and simultaneously like aching for my people.
It seems too like flexibility is a word that I heard a lot talking to everyone around theater, that you just have to accept a degree of uncertainty and a lack of control, which is hard for people.
I hesitate to say this after everything that we've said about how lucky we are, and the immense sense of kind of gratitude and that weird kind of survivor's guilt that you mentioned, Charisse. But I got to say, yes, you know, we after those 49 weeks off, to suddenly come back to work was such a shock to the system. As fit as I tried to stay and everything, that we came back and it was tough. We worked so hard to get the show back up. Since we've come back to work, we've been doing our 8 shows a week plus 2 days a week's rehearsal and all the rest of it. And I think yesterday, on our 1 day off a week, I was, you know, trying to vocal rest and going around in circles, losing my temper with my child and apologizing and falling asleep where I sat, and trying to keep up my sourdough bread baking that I learnt during lockdown. And I caught myself just for a moment, like, missing lockdown and thinking, oh God, what I wouldn't have for another. And then I just had to stop and go, okay, wait a minute, buddy. Let's not lose perspective.
The main goal for me with Frozen was just get to opening night. And then I got to opening night, and then I was like, oh, that's right, I have to keep doing these shows 8 times a week. And it was remembering that exhaustion. Like, you actually do forget, even though I prepped for it. It's still that thing of what you've got to really do the 8 shows a week to really feel what that is. Because I remember going, oh my gosh, I forgot how tired I am. And it's this weird kind of balance where you're so tired, but you are so grateful at the same time.
And to what extent have your sort of offstage lives changed too, or the way you deal with the role? And, you know, what are you doing to kind of stay strong through this process?
Part of the lockdown was really great for me, because I got to go home. And what's really difficult is like right now, my partner and everybody is on the other side of the world. So those days where I'm just like, I'm so tired. I'm like, right? And then I'm like, there's nobody here. So been doing a lot of reading. I also love to craft. So I made some macrame plant holders.
In terms of how we're sort of looking after each other, I think there is a real sense that we are checking in with each other more, I think, than maybe. We all had to find each other again when we came back too, because, 42 people plus double that in the crew, that's a lot of births, deaths, marriages. When we came back, people had changed and we had to kind of find each other again. And that's still happening, I think, that process, figuring out who each other are now in this new world and what the show is as well. The show has changed. Its themes are resonating in different ways. Stage door used to just be a parade of witches' hats and wands and people of all ages, wanting to connect, and that's gone. And a large part of Harry Potter is that kind of audience relationship with you. So the company are working on a new way to sort of maybe keep that going digitally.
There are so many Elsas. Let me tell you, it's a sea of Elsas.
I bet, yeah.
And it is a shame because, you want to have that sort of experience with the kids where you get a photo and they're like, oh, this was Elsa. And so to not sort of have that now, that definitely is a missing part. But in saying that, it's why, and they're still seeing the actual show. And so when I'm coming from the car park and I'm seeing all the little Elsas trotting along to the theatre, that honestly, it warms my heart every single time. I never get sick of it.
And Simon, you're preparing for a new role with the new show coming. How has that process changed for you?
Well, we haven't begun rehearsal yet for Moulin Rouge, but I mean, a really big difference was the length of the audition process, because having been interrupted by COVID, I mean, it's about 14 months in all.
Wow.
From when they started first seeing people, and then COVID stopped us. Then there were kind of Skype sessions with the creatives in New York. Then there was a hold for about 6 or 7 months, and then
oh god,
it was full on. It was full on. It was over. Yeah. The producers of the show brought an enormous amount of people over from the US and who quarantined for 2 weeks. And there began this kind of 5-week process. Front of the panel, everyone in masks. You had to be 4 meters away. It was fun. No, it wasn't fun. It was torture. But it was what had to be done. I think the whole thing about this pandemic is the wonder at how adaptable human beings are ultimately.
I'm curious what you're each going to take away from this experience of doing theater in this moment. When you talk about it in 10 or 20 years from now, what do you think you'll say about this moment?
Gosh, that's interesting, isn't it? That this will be a big story in our lives. In the 22 years of my career thus far, I feel like a big conversation that's been happening just because of where we are in time and in this century. Theatre has been having this continual conversation about how do we compete with television and streaming. How's theatre going to survive? And I've secretly always held on to this hope that theatre, of course, offers something that film and TV can't offer. And I feel like we've really come face to face with that thing now that we've come back to work after all that time off, is that what theatre offers is really holy and special and something that human beings have done since there's been human beings, and we probably always will. And I feel like it's brought our industry closer together.
And I really think it's this level of depth that has come through this sort of, global trauma, which is only just bubbling out as actors. And it's so beautiful to witness because it's so raw. And that's what live theatre does.
I think what I would take away from this is across the board, from the tiniest theatre companies to the great big musicals, audiences really are not going away, and they really missed us, and they really care about us.
Some of the greatest theatre writing in the world has come out of great adversity, or people writing under incredible restrictions, or governments that won't let them speak, and I'm also really excited to see what our young writers are going to come up with, considering what they've been through, what they're going to write.
In America too, that the pandemic made everybody sit down and really take a look at what's actually happening in our country. You couldn't be like, I'm too busy, I'm at work. No, you're not. You have to sit here, and there's change happening because of the fact that we all had to be like, wow, this is not okay how we've been living. There's going to be some beautiful art that comes out of that. I really, really absolutely agree with that. There's going to be, people's voices are being heard because we had to sit and listen and watch. So if anything, keep that.
I love that you're ending on an optimistic note. Thanks, guys. This has been great. Thank you, Gemma, Charisse, Simon, and Gareth. We have one more actor to hear from and a very special performance that she'll introduce. Here's Zoe Gertz from Come From Away in Her Majesty's Theatre in Melbourne to tell us about the song Me and the Sky.
Me and the Sky is a song that tells the story of Beverly Bass, the first female captain for American Airlines, who also happened to be one of the pilots who was diverted to Gander, Newfoundland after the events of September 11. It's a story about someone whose life passion is threatened in a time of crisis. And I can't help but reflect on the previous year and my own questions about when and if I'd ever be on stage again. We're so incredibly lucky here in Australia to be back on stage, and I know every time we step out on that stage we're not thinking just about the other companies have come from away, but all the other actors, musicians, crew, managers, ushers, designers, all of these people in our industry who are still unable to get back to doing what they love. This performance is for them.
My parents must have thought they had a crazy kid, 'cause I was one of those kids who always knew what I wanted. They took me down to the airport to see all the planes depart, and watching them fly, something inside of me was starting. I was 8 when I told them that I'd be a pilot. But I was too young and too short, and there were no female captains. And my dad said, be patient, he said, just see what happens. But I took my first lesson, came down from the sky, and told my father I'd fly for the rest of my life. And I got my first job, flying for a mortician in a tiny Bonanza, just a corpse and me. $5 an hour for flying dead bodies. I had to climb over their faces just to get to my seat. And suddenly the wheels lift off, the ground is falling backwards. I am suddenly alive. Suddenly I'm in the cockpit. Suddenly everything's changed. Suddenly I'm not too young or too short, and the passengers in the back don't complain. Suddenly I'm flying company charters. Suddenly everything's high. Suddenly there's nothing in between me and the sky. American Airlines had the prettiest planes, so I applied as a flight engineer. But the World War II pilots, they all complained. They said girls shouldn't be in the cockpit. Hey lady, hey baby, hey, why don't you grab us a drink? And the flight attendants weren't my friends back then, and they said, are you better than us, do you think? But I kept getting hired in the World War II crew. They retired and the girls all thought much higher of me. 1986, the first female American captain in history. Suddenly I'm in the cockpit. Suddenly I've got my wings. Suddenly all of the pilots protesting me. Well, they can get their own drinks. Suddenly there's no one saying stay grounded. Looking pretend to be pilots, 'cause suddenly I am a senior instructor, and somehow I'm 51. Suddenly I'm flying from Paris to Dallas, across the Atlantic and feeling calm. And suddenly someone on air-to-air traffic says at 8:46 there's been a terrorist action, and the one thing I loved more than anything was used as the bomb. Suddenly I'm in a hotel. Suddenly something has died. Suddenly there's something in between me and the sky.
Wow. I still remember the first time I heard that song. It was actually September 11th in 2016. I was at Ford's Theater in DC, and Come From Away was still working its way to Broadway. The world has changed so much since then, but that song still moves me, and I hope you enjoyed it too. That was our closing number. We're going to wrap up this episode, but we'll be back this summer with another one about signs of life here in New York. I want to thank Gemma and Zoe for singing for us, and all the actors and the producers and the fans who spoke with us, and of course, my trusted collaborator on all things Australia, Damien Cave. Most of all, I want to thank you. As subscribers to The Times, you make all of our journalism possible, and we are so, so grateful. We'll have more subscriber events in May, which you can learn about at timesevents.nytimes.com. It's been heartening to see theater lovers joining this event from all over the world, and that means I have no idea what time it is wherever you may be on this great planet. So good night, or good morning, or good afternoon, and I hope to see you all next time.
I'm Jill Cowan. I write the California Today newsletter, and I'm based in Los Angeles.
My name is Charles Blow, an op-ed columnist at the New York Times.
My name is Ella Catu, and I'm an editor in Mexico City.
I'm Celia Duggar, and I lead a fabulous team of health and science journalists at the New York Times. We hope that our work this past year, explaining the coronavirus and how to protect yourself from it, has helped you all live safer lives.
Every day, the New York Times brings you the world.
We try to make you smile from time to time, too. Your generosity with your own perspectives, as well as your support, make our work possible. I'm so grateful you've trusted us to help guide you through this tumultuous time.
We appreciate the opportunity to reach you with our work every day, wherever you are. Thank you for trusting us and letting us into your life.
We are a reader-supported institution driven by people like you who believe in truth.